got some excellent questions here, so we're just going to go front to back, and if we've got any time at the end, then we'll pick up any further questions that anybody's got. So first question, nice one.
I don't like the way you said the end there. Never mind.
First one to get us started. When it all hits the fan, where do you think the best place is to be?
You know, people ask me all the time about when the shit hits the fan. And I point out that the shit is no longer hitting the fan is covered in shit, and the shit is hitting the shit at this point. So what do you need? What are you looking for? Where do you go? People ask me that all the time. Where's the best place I could move to? Where should I go? You should go right here. You should come to grips with what it means to live, which includes dying. You should come to grips with the fact that all species go extinct, including the most special one in the history of the universe. Move inside. We're all going to die. Surely you knew that when you were 11. That's when I realized that this grandmother I barely knew died, and I cried for like 2 weeks, and it took me a decade to figure out that it wasn't about her. I barely knew her. It was the first grandparent that I knew to die. But I didn't really know her. I was crying for me. That's when I realized that mortality applied to me as well. It sucked. Still kind of does. We were going to live forever. Technology was going to allow everybody to live forever. But nobody lives forever. And you've known about your mortality for a long time. Where will it be habitat longest of anywhere else on the planet? Steve Wozniak, the guy who single-handedly created the Apple I and Apple II computers, one of the 3 co-founders of Apple, contacted me via email a little over 2 years ago, December 2012, and I was pretty blown away because I don't get email from Steve Wozniak very often. Right, so I'm on my holiday, it's late December 2012, and I get a message from Steve Wozniak, and I thought, this can't be true. And then I did a little research, and sure enough, he's using an address and has his picture with it, his picture with him and his 4th wife, Janet. And so I did a little research, and yeah, that looks like them. And this is the clincher for me. His name and email address were flipped upside down. And I don't know about you, but I can't do that. But Steve Wozniak, the IT guy, the guy who invented the Apple computer, he can do that. So I thought, this could be him. And he contacted me and he says, I've been tracking your writing and your speaking for quite a long time, and I agree that we aren't going to have humans on the planet beyond 2030 or so. So I'm going to move to the southern hemisphere, as you suggest. And I suggested that the last places with human habitat on this planet would be places like South Africa and New Zealand and Tasmania, the southern island state of Australia, places that are down close to that big body of ice that still exists and still will in another few years, and that are a long way away from the world's 400 and some nuclear power facilities. And so he did. He moved. 5 months ago, he moved to Tasmania. And he didn't even offer to give me a place to stay. I mean, it's my idea, and I'm stuck here with no job and dirt poor, and he moves to Australia.
I'm sure he'd put you up if you rocked up there, you know.
Well, now I'm mad. We're going to have to edit that out because, you know, I want to be tight with Steve. The Woz, as I call him. Just kidding. Next.
2 questions here. Have you been approached by the UK media for interviews, and how have politicians responded to your views?
I have not been approached by any UK media for interviews, although I think when I'm in London in a couple of weeks I will be staying with Nick Breeze, who has done quite a few interviews with climate scientists. And he interviewed Natalia Shukova, for example, Nick Breeze, and I think I'm going to be staying with him in London, so I bet I can squeeze in an interview with him. How have politicians responded? So far, they haven't. I haven't heard from one of them. I contacted the governor of the state of Arizona when I was still working actively at the university, and I talked to 2 of her leading advisors, the one for energy and the one for agricultural and natural resources, I think. And I talked to them for an hour and a half on the phone, and they just said repeatedly, there's nothing we can do. And it took me a few weeks to realize what that means is there's nothing we will do. It's a little weird. Sorry, I digress. Go, hit me.
What do you think society in the UK will be like in 2025 if you're right?
If the models and projections and data are correct, there will be no society in the UK in 2025.
Based on that, we've got a question. Given what you've said, is it wise to not procreate?
A decision I made a long time ago was to not procreate. But given that I encourage people to pursue lives of excellence and love, if you love having babies, well, who am I to get in your way? I mean, that's as fundamental a right as any we have in any society that calls itself free, right? The right to procreate. So as a consequence, we add more than 200,000 people a day to the planet. That's births minus deaths. Every single day we go deeper into population overshoot. In a couple of weeks we had a couple million people. That's a lot. We don't have fossil energy, we don't have clean water, we don't have food for those people. We just keep cranking them out. I've thought it was a bad idea for my entire career. Every course I ever taught at university, I pointed out that I thought it was a bad idea. And this is how good an educator I am. Every one of my students went out and procreated like there was no tomorrow. So I got this thing figured out.
It's all looking very, very bad. Do you think that the best thing to do is to pursue a life of excess and pleasure for our last few short years because we can't do anything about it?
Hedonism rocks. That's the hedonism question. I get it every time. In the United States, it's easy to answer the question. People ask me all the time, well, why don't I just party like it's 1999? And I say, okay, you're an American. Why don't I party? How would I tell the difference? We're doing what we want anyway, aren't we? I mean, in the United States, we have the world's reserve currency. When I was a kid, and I know you love stories that start out like that, when I was a kid, by gum, nobody went anywhere, you know? Now, everybody goes everywhere. We do what we want. It's amazing. The central banks of the world just keep churning out the money so that we all feel like we have access to lots of money. I don't know what pursuing excellence means for any of you. I doubt it means being the last person on the planet so that you have all the money. I have no doubt that some sociopath will be the last person on the planet. They won't know it, of course, because they won't know that whether there's somebody alive over the next hill or not, but they'll finish with all the money. If that's what a life of excellence means to you, then sally on, go forth, get all that money. But at the end, you can only have so many shoes.
Okay. Are there questions that we could ask climate experts that would identify their stance?
Oh, what should we ask climate scientists?
Yeah.
Are you out of your freaking mind? Have you not actually looked at the data? Here's one for Michael Mann, one of the top 2 climate scientists in the world, along with James Hansen. Michael Mann at Pennsylvania State University was asked recently in an interview with Tom Hartman at RT. He was asked, what do we do? And Michael Mann follows my data. I've been in email exchanges with him, but he never admits that he follows my website. And Michael Mann says, well, first of all, we have to keep burning coal. The leading climate scientist in the world who's actively working today says, first of all, we need to keep burning coal because we need to keep those sulfates going up into the atmosphere. Those sulfates fall out and we're screwed. Well, guess what? We're screwed anyway. If you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, then do. Let's not keep doing the same thing that got us here. Burning coal, the worst fossil fuel ever. Let's keep doing that. And then he says, until we figure out how to extract carbon dioxide and methane at scale from the atmosphere, we're going to have to keep burning coal. No, we aren't. Maybe, Michael Mann, it's not all about us. Maybe it's not all about relatively wealthy white guys at Pennsylvania State University. Maybe it's about the entire living planet, which we drive to extinction at the rate of 150 to 200 species a day. Maybe this whole thing isn't about you and me and rich white men. Sorry, I got a little angry there.
Got a question here. John Michael, is that Green's view is that collapse will happen over time and your view differs from his. Why would you disagree with him?
I think I said at the outset that I'm not making a prediction when I say that collapse could happen abruptly. I'm just pointing out that it could happen abruptly, and as a consequence, if it did, I think we would see conditions that drive us to our own extinction in a very short period of time. So that could happen. I'm not saying it will happen. That aside, John Michael Greer wrote a book called The Long Descent, in which he predicted civilization would last another 200 or 300 years. This is a book written 8 or 10 years ago. And if you go to his website today, I think it's archdruid.blogspot.com, and read his essays from this year so far for the last few months, he predicts that American empire hovers on the brink and will be done this year. Oh, that's a turnabout. So it's not me disagreeing with his view. His view has come around to match the idea that industrial civilization could end, but that's not in the near future, and that's not my view. That's just something that could happen. Charles Hugh Smith, who writes at Of Two Minds, has always been the bicycle guy. He lives in Southern California, and he says, we're going to bicycle our way out of this. We'll always have civilization. We'll always have humans on the planet. It's no big deal. And then in January of this year, he wrote, America just experienced its last Christmas. Complete turnabout from what he'd been writing very conservatively over the course of the last half a decade. So it could be that civilization ends this year or next or the next. We can't sustain the unsustainable forever, obviously. When it does happen, I suspect it will be a relatively abrupt termination, but I don't know that because we can't predict the future with great accuracy. We can predict that civilization will end, because they always have. This one is completely dependent upon ready supplies of cheap fossil fuels, especially oil. That's not going to last forever. And we can predict that every species that occupies the planet will go extinct. We just don't know the day. I can't tag you with an expiration date, unfortunately.
Do you think we could ever make Mars or another planet habitable for us? And do you think we could ever do it in time?
You know, this planet was habitable for us, and we managed to fuck it up pretty badly, didn't we? So what do you want, another one? Okay, so we spoiled our nest over there. Let's go over here. So could we inhabit Mars? Yeah, maybe. Would it be my favorite choice? No, my favorite choice would be to stop screwing it up here so badly, even if it means we're not around for the next 3,000 years or 2.8 million years, which is how long the genus Homo has been here. I would rather we'd stop doing what we're doing here and destroying the only habitat we've ever known, instead of getting in our spaceship and going. I mean, that's the whole thing, isn't it? That's the whole story of imperialism throughout its history, is we screw it up in one place because there's always another place to go. Let's stop. Just stop.
How do we do that?
How do we stop imperialism?
No, how do we stop?
How do we stop industrial civilization? There's an excellent book that you can read online. It's free. Underminers.org.
What's your idea, though?
What's my idea?
Yeah. What do you suggest that we do?
How do we terminate industrial civilization?
No, how do we stop climate change?
Oh, we don't.
What?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. We don't. We've triggered abrupt climate change. We've triggered an event that leads to 5 to 16 sea temperature rise in a decade or two because of the methane clathrate. We fired the clathrate gun. We can't undo that. There's no way to go back. Unless you give me a time machine, there's no stopping this ship.
So there's no answer then? So the whole lecture has been pointless, really?
I think so. I'm just here for the free. Oh, I don't drink beer. What the hell am I here for?
I don't know, you tell me.
My point, and I do have one after all this time, is that we have fired the clathrate gun. We have created events that will lead to our extinction in the not very distant future. And so, as a consequence, we should act with some decency and respect towards humans and other organisms on the planet. That's all. I could have mailed that over here, but nobody would read the damn thing. I've been writing it for 5 years, and nobody's read the thing, so I just came over to say it.
Okay. I've got some questions that follow on from that. So given all the evidence that you've presented and the fact that we can't actually stop climate change, what do you think is the most important thing we could be doing now if you had to put it in one single act?
Loving each other.
Right.
You know, people tell me all the time that I'm proposing giving up, that I'm saying throw in the towel. I'm not. I'm proposing we terminate industrial civilization, not on our behalf, but on behalf of the species we drive to extinction at an astonishing rate. Edward O. Wilson, conservation biologist at Harvard, says it only takes 10 million years to recover from a great extinction event. 10 million years. Even for the great dying, that was the case. I'm looking forward to the 10 million years and hoping we can save as many seeds as possible to repopulate, to give us a vibrant, thriving planet again. It won't have humans on it, but let's love each other and love the living planet while we have a chance.
So you don't have any ideas then of how to cure climate change?
There's no cure. I have a great idea. There's no hope. But hope, as Nietzsche pointed out, is the worst of evils, for it extends the torments of man. Hope is wishing for an outcome over which we have no agency. It's hopeless. Love each other. Love the planet. Act with decency and respect and integrity. Let's stop killing everything as if it's our God-given right. That's something. That's not nothing. Yes, we're all dead, but you knew you were going to die anyway. So this is how we act on the way out the door. This is how the last humans to populate the planet act as the last humans to populate the planet.
Can I ask you how...
I was just going into a brilliant sermon. If you could just give me 1 minute, that'd be awesome. So how are we going to act in light of the fact that no good will come of it? What better judge of our character than how we treat people who can do nothing for us, and how we treat other species that we think can do nothing for us, but in fact provide for our own survival? What better judge of our character than when we're dead anyway, we act with decency and respect towards other human beings and to the living planet? Is there a better way to act? Is there a better way to live than pursuing love and excellence, whatever that means to you? If there is, I want to hear about it.
I mean, tell me, when you came to UK from the States, how did you get here?
I have an answer right here in my pocket for that question because I get it all the time. Are you familiar with Jevons Paradox? William Stanley Jevons wrote a book published in 1865, I think, called The Coal Question, in which he pointed out that energy efficiency and energy conservation are irrelevant. They only make us burn it faster. He was talking about coal, but it applies to all finite materials. Everywhere I fly, the flights are mostly empty because the economic contraction is underway. I'm getting there. Can you just give me a minute? I just need a minute. I flew in an airplane.
Did you not think that you were exacerbating climate change by flying in an aeroplane, that it wouldn't have been better to remain in the States rather than wasting all that energy flying?
My goal is not to sustain the unsustainable by practicing conservation, which is austerity for the masses. My goal is to terminate industrial civilization by causing a spike in the price of oil that will bring the whole damn thing down. In addition, if you like civilization, and I'm betting you do, I bet you like having the lights on, the ability to extract water through the taps, I'm guessing that you appreciate the fact that we continue spewing carbon into the atmosphere because that's the only thing allowing us to survive today. Once that ends, we experience a 1.4 C temperature rise. That added to the 0.85 takes us up to about 2.5 degrees global average. What that means is in the interior of large continents, we're no longer able to grow grain. Whoops, no civilization, we're done. So there are many, many, many reasons for not continuing what we're doing, and I'm a big fan of all of them. And yes, I am a hypocrite. I stand before you as perhaps the world's worst human being. I flew over here in a plane that was mostly empty.
What do we tell our children then? So
What do you tell your children?
the same, love each person, love the planet.
Yeah, why not? So how old are your children?
50.
So they don't do this whole Santa Claus Easter Bunny thing, do they? Let's tell them the truth about everything. Not just Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. Let's tell them the truth about everything. I mean, I get this all the time. Why do you tell people? Well, because the corporate media and the corporate governments, they're not going to tell you anything. So I've taken it upon myself to tell you that you're not going to live forever. And that in light of that information, you might act differently than you otherwise would.
Do you think that if people knew a solution that would make things a bit better could happen. We do that sprinkling sulfates through geo engineering.
The referee journal literature is clear on that topic, that solar radiation management is a prescription for continued disaster. We have fired the clathrate gun. If everybody knew what I told you tonight, would we, as a consequence, act very differently? Maybe. But we've known about climate change and it being a problem for our grandchildren since I was 8 years old, and we didn't change a thing. You know, I think we all know that we're doing some pretty horrible things in the name of industrial civilization.
That's all very true, but are you sure about the geoengineering? Because a big volcano can cool the Earth for quite a time.
Yes, so the referee journal literature is clear on this. A big volcano or solar radiation management can cause a cooling of the planet, or at least a pause in the increase in temperature. But once the particulates fall out, warming goes exponential.
Well,
So you can't stop.
Well, exactly.
You can't ever stop. Think about that.
Well,
Forever is a long time, especially at the end.
I might give a few generations a chance.
I think we've played God for long enough, and it's pretty clear what the results are. So let's stop. There's no indication that we could ever make things better by using the same tools that have made things so horribly bad.
If everybody died on the earth, about 10 people of a horrible disease, and 10 Guy McPherson survived, Guy McPherson Jr. 1 to 10, you all lived in a south-facing house in the best place, and you all practiced permaculture, you burned no fossil fuel, then would you survive?
I don't think so. I don't think we can, and a lot of people disagree, obviously. A lot of people think we can get down to a few huddled masses living near Antarctica, for example. But certainly not in the northern hemisphere where all the methane is coming out. Maybe Steve Wozniak and his wives and children will survive in Tasmania. Maybe. I mean, we can't predict the future with great accuracy. I don't think so, because I think we've triggered events that lead to a too rapid rise in temperature in a too short a period of time for there to be habitat for humans. And we can't store food forever. So at some point, the planet has to grow food for us. And I just don't see that happening. And
what about if everybody like me, lifelong vegan for animal rights reasons, not a fashionable Hollywood vegan like these idiots you get now? What about the veganism on you know?
did you just call Hollywood vegans idiots?
I did, that's me, yeah.
Okay.
Do it for their own health, they do it fine.
You're right. I get it. No.
No, so,
Plants, without plants, we're all dead.
yeah.
Already the level, the number of phytoplankton in the ocean is way down because of ocean acidification resulting from carbon dioxide increase. A recent paper in the referee journal literature says we could lose all phytoplankton, all in the ocean. That's half the oxygen we breathe and half the food we eat. And the other half is from land plants. And we're killing all them too, and an abrupt rise in temperature already, as I indicated. Evolution by natural selection is being outstripped by climate change by a factor of 10,000. And we haven't even really gotten into the abrupt part of the show yet, where we see a catastrophic rise in a very short period of time. There's no way for plants to keep up with that. So I don't care what you eat, unless it's human jerky, you're in for a really starving future. If the entire human race went vegan, we still fired the clathrate gun. And there's no undoing it. There's no unfiring the gun. The bullets are in the air. They're headed at our heads.
We are talking East Siberian Sea, aren't we?
We're talking about the entire Arctic continental shelf.
Okay.
Well, the best known of which is the East Siberian continental shelf, yes.
A related but slightly separate question. Why haven't we heard from Shakova for a while?
Good question. I don't know. Well, she was banned from going to that meeting where Gavin Schmidt made a complete ass out of himself by tweeting repeated insults to her. This is a guy who relies upon models, all of which have been demonstrated to be very conservative. And so his models don't match her reality, so he disparages her.
I'd like to ask about the modelling does Gavin Schmidt and Pierre Humbert and Miles Allen know their models are screwed up with all these missing positive feedbacks, and do any of them admit it?
I don't know if they know.
How much do you rely on linked economic and climate models in what you say? You say the collapse of civilization, and that implies economic modelling as well as climate modelling.
Right, so I don't know what they know, what the modelers know. I don't know why they don't include anything beyond carbon dioxide in their models and why their models are repeatedly so conservative. I don't know if they know more than they're telling, and because Gavin Schmidt is an employee of the US federal government, maybe that's why he's not telling, but I don't know that. I don't know what these people know. How much do I rely on models? Almost not at all. So nothing I presented today is based on a model.
So the collapse of civilization is not, how do you get the collapse of civilization?
Well, if civilization collapses, and I'm not saying it will,
if
but
it does, we've got one problem.
Right.
If it doesn't, we've got the other.
right, exactly. So if it collapses, I suspect we'll observe at least a 1.4 degree temperature rise in a matter of days or weeks after that happening. And if it doesn't, we keep spewing carbon dioxide and contributing to a far worse problem. And methane because of industrial agriculture, most notably feedlot meat, okay, which is approximately a third of the methane being emitted right now. So things get worse every single day. Most people I know think things are getting better every day because we have smartphones. But what a price to pay. Genocide for smartphones, that's my bumper sticker.
I have a question. Some people, when they're faced with this kind of evidence, may think of suicide because it's actually quite depressing. And I have a teenage son who has, for some reason, kind of understood the mess we're in. He's my son. I talk about this kind of thing a lot. And he says there's no point to life and he wants to end his life, and he's 17. And I'm just wondering what your feelings are on when people threaten suicide, or they talk about it quite rationally.
I'm indifferent. I'm non-judgmental about whether you commit suicide or not. But I want you to think about it before you do. Think about the fact that against all odds, you're here, that you get to live, that the odds against you being here exceed the odds against plucking a single atom at random from the entire universe. That we have one short life. Let's live. Let's act as if moments matter. We've always known, your son has known since he was 10 or 11 or 12 years old that he was going to die, just like everybody else. He probably knew at 5, really, that everybody knows. He probably knew at 5 that he was going to die, but it takes a few years to really integrate that and to fully understand what it means, right? And so he's known for a while he was going to die. And so for me, that says live. The fact that your life is short does not mean that you ought to shorten it further. I mean, yes, some people choose to do that. They all call me. Every one of them. I get a phone call or a Skype call almost every day from somebody who's pondering suicide. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychotherapist. When it's the same person over and over again, sometimes talking them off the ledge, for me, means just jump. I was kidding. You're supposed to laugh. Join me. Help me out here. But seriously, I think we need to act with compassion. I think that people in their teens, when I was 17, I was seriously considering suicide. And I didn't know what I know now. It just seemed that things were pretty screwed up. And so I think we need to act with compassion for people who are having suicidal ideation and give them a reason to live. And I think they have plenty of reasons already, but they might need convinced of that. This is a pretty amazing deal we have going, that we get to live, that we get all these privileges associated with living in a predominantly white culture, that we get all the advantages of empire, like lights on at the flip of a switch and water through the taps by simply pushing the tap. That we get to to jump in our cars and drive around, jump on our bicycles, ride around, take a walk in the countryside. The world is really pretty damned amazing. Interestingly, I was 54 years old when I discovered what grief was. I'm an academic scientist. I'm completely clueless, or, as it says here on the back of the board, I'm a crazy man. I think this was written for me. We get to live. It's astonishing. Sometimes I'm having a bad day. I was 54 years old. I went to a grief recovery workshop. And, I knew that things were screwed up in my head, but I couldn't put a label on it. Within 20 minutes, I knew that what I was experiencing was grief. We have an incredibly grief-denying culture, especially in the United States. We don't even acknowledge that it happens. When somebody is grieving, we tell them to go to their room. You should grieve alone. We don't do that in public. It's absurd. So finally, I figured out that I was wishing for a different past. It's one of the definitions of grief. That all my relationships had changed when I left active service at the university and became the, you got it, crazy man, because I left active service at the university, because I gave up a 6-figure paycheck in which I wasn't required to do any work at all, just to go out and create a homestead. So I lost all my family, I lost all my friends, and so I spent the next 5 years wishing for a different past, wishing to change those relationships that had been irrecoverably changed. And I didn't even know what to call it. And then finally, just over a year ago, I went to a workshop and I figured out what to call it. That's grief. So your son experiences it. Most of us experience it at some point. And there are ways to recover from it. There are ways to deal with reality that don't involve ending your life.
I'm just going to ask what take-up there's been of your ideas really in different places, and also I was just interested in the States around, Naomi Klein's big book and sort of 350.org. There's been a big wave of kind of campaigning. What impact you think that's having on them?
Yeah, have people started to take up these ideas and live differently? And then what about in the United States, where Naomi Klein and Bill McKibben, or 350.org, are having such a big showing now? Sponsored by Rockefeller's, Big Oil. That's where 350's money comes from. What kind of impact are they having? I would argue that they are continuing to promote the idea that civilization is a good thing, and that they are afraid to tell the whole truth. That Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything, should have been titled This Changes Nothing. She proposes ending capitalism by selling a $40 book. I'm not sure how that's going to help. And what has been the response? It's been quite varied. About 2 years ago, I spoke in Westchester County, New York, and there were 100 and some people in the audience, and 2 or 3 of them changed their lives dramatically. One of them had wanted to make a movie since she was 14 years old, and she actually spent time. Her first degree was in radio and television production, and then she went and worked in Hollywood for a while. Got married, had kids, lost track of her dream, that whole thing. And when she heard me speak, she went and lay in her bed for 5 weeks and cried. And when she got up, she said, I'm going to do what I wanted to do. I'm going to do what I love. I'm going to make a movie. And she did. And she was one of 2 or 3 people at that event who changed their lives radically so that they were doing what they loved and spending more of their time doing what they loved and less of their time on the hamster wheel that is civilization that has us chasing the next carrot. So some people change, other people think I'm the crazy man. And I'm not denying my insanity while invoking Krishnamurti. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
On a planet with such vast biodiversity, why is it that you feel that if the climate changes in the way you're saying, that certain species that maybe aren't thriving as much now possibly won't thrive in a slightly different climate and create possibly a slightly new equilibrium on the planet?
Right, so since we have this amazing biodiversity on this planet, why won't some species prosper in light of this new environment that we're creating? Well, that would require the ability to move, and plants are not known for being especially mobile. for one thing. And it could be. It could be that the species currently known as biological invaders or non-native species will spread even faster to areas currently outside of their habitat, that new habitats could open up. But they better go faster. You know, it better happen in a really, really rapid period of time. And it's not as if we can grow wheat in places where we currently don't have wheat growing, right? That we can't grow grains that are currently grown mostly in the interior of large continents in the northern hemisphere, like the central United States. The ability to grow grains depends upon not just the climate and the weather, but also on the soils. And the soils are not going to change in time, that we can suddenly start growing wheat in Alaska and northern Canada. Those soils are completely unfit for growing grains. And it's the same everywhere.
There was, NASA did an experiment a while back with lichen. They put it in an atmosphere identical to Mars. You look like you've seen this. And it thrived in the synthesized Martian atmosphere, which I just think is a wonderful example of how life can actually survive in a different atmosphere and a different environment. We already have life forms on this planet that can thrive under different circumstances.
Right. So lichens are a particularly poor example, I think, for that experiment, since they live for hundreds or thousands of years and are completely sessile. I mean, the methane-eating microbes, methane-eating bacteria will be fine. There are microbes that live 7 miles below the surface of the earth. They'll be fine. I don't think we can kill everything. That's clearly one of the goals of civilization, is to kill everything. But I don't think we're going to make it before we're all gone.
So you're not going for another great extinction?
Oh, the 6th great extinction is underway. Of course we're in the midst of a great extinction. I'm just suggesting that we won't manage to kill everything. Unless we've actually triggered runaway greenhouse. We've triggered Venus. And there have been 5 previous great extinction events, and 16 less great.
Do you have a view on Lost Hours?
Yes.
Tell us.
I mean, it's a very short film, Last Hours, by Tom Hartman, but he expresses his hope at the end, and I think that's completely unjustified. Hope is wishful thinking, for one thing. It assumes no agency. I'd prefer we act, not because it'll make any difference in terms of our own extinction.
So if we click the end off, you wouldn't object too much?
Right, that's right. I mean, it's only like 12 minutes or something like that, so. As with essentially every report I read and every news report I hear on the broadcast media, the hope comes in at the end, right? All we have to do, and if I did that, I'd be on every mainstream outlet in the country. If I proposed 3 things that we can do to turn this all around, I'd be on the news all the time. Yeah, if I tell people that all that we have to do is change light bulbs, switch to electric cars, and stop drinking so much water, we'll be fine. But we won't. We won't do any of those things, and even if we did, it wouldn't matter.
Going on to the last question, I think this is a nice one to end on. Given the weight of the evidence and what you've been able to highlight to us, how do you reconcile this crisis scenario with living a positive life, retaining your sanity and your sense of agency?
You know, when I was teaching at the university, somebody would ask a question like that, and I'd say, that's a great question. And when a professor says that's a great question, it means he has no idea what the answer is. I think that my primary message, which is to pursue love and pursue excellence, is a decent, legitimate set of suggestions, regardless of what happens in the future. And so what I'm suggesting is a Buddhist-inspired approach, and I know essentially nothing about Buddhism, so this might not even be right, that we actually live here now. That we take actions and not be attached to the outcome of those actions. That we act with decency towards each other, with respect towards each other, even if, especially if, we're all going to be dead in the not very distant future. Thank you very, very much for coming tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.